Today, we're talking about an economist who completely changed the game, Milton Friedman. You see, for decades after World War II, there was this one big idea about how economies worked, and pretty much everyone in charge believed it. But Friedman came along, and with just a couple of powerful, game-changing insights, he didn't just challenge that idea, he shattered it. He basically redrew the entire map of modern economics. So let's get into how he did it.
So, imagine this. What if governments had a magic key? A simple way to get more jobs, just by letting prices rise a little bit. For a long time, it seemed like they really had it. The answer was a clear yes. But that yes was about to get a serious reality check, one that would change economic policy forever.
All right, so let's set the scene. We need to go back to the old world, to the economic playbook that basically every Western government was using after the war. This was the high point of what's known as the Keynesian consensus, and it was all built on what looked like a really simple, really reliable relationship. And here it is. This is the Phillips curve. Now, you can immediately see why it was so popular. It's incredibly simple. It showed this neat, tidy downward slope. When inflation went up, unemployment went down. And for policymakers, this was like a menu of options. They thought they could just pick and choose what they wanted.
I mean, the promise here was just irresistible, right? Governments thought they could fine-tune the entire economy. If unemployment started creeping up, no problem, just step on the gas, stimulate some demand, accept a little more inflation, and bam, more jobs for everyone. This wasn't just an idea, it became the absolute bedrock of economic policy for a generation.
But even while this idea was king, Milton Friedman was already starting to find the cracks in the foundation. His early work started introducing some really different ways of thinking about how people and economies actually work.
Okay, so first, Friedman totally flipped the script on how we think about spending. This was his permanent income hypothesis. The old view was simple. If you give someone a one-time tax rebate, they'll go out and spend it right away, boosting the economy. But Friedman said, hang on a second, people are smarter than that. He argued we base our spending on what we expect to earn over our whole lifetime, our permanent income. A one-time check doesn't really change that bigger picture, so we're probably going to save a lot of it. And that idea was a direct shot at the logic behind short-term government stimulus.
Then, he took on the Great Depression. I mean, the story everyone knew is that the Depression proved that monetary policy was useless, like trying to push on a string. But Friedman, along with Anna Schwartz, dug into the data and showed the exact opposite was true. The reason the Depression was so bad was because the Federal Reserve had made disastrous mistakes, causing the U.S. money supply to shrink by a third. So the big takeaway wasn't that money didn't matter, it's that money mattered a huge amount, and the people in charge had gotten it catastrophically wrong.
So these early ideas were already shaking things up, but they were really just setting the stage for his master stroke. In 1968, in a huge address to the American Economic Association, Friedman introduced the one thing the Phillips curve had completely ignored: human expectations. This was the idea that would finally break the old consensus.
He kicked it off with this new concept he called the natural rate of unemployment. His point was that every economy has a sort of baseline level of unemployment. And it's not determined by how much money the government is printing. No, it's determined by real structural things, like technology, regulations, how easy it is for people to find jobs that match their skills. And you can't just wish that away with more inflation.
And this right here is the absolute core of his whole argument. That trade-off from the Phillips curve, it only works when inflation comes as a surprise. Why? Well, think about it. If prices suddenly jump up, businesses see bigger profits and want to hire more people. At the same time, workers see a bigger number on their paycheck and think they're getting a real raise. For a little while, everyone is kind of fooled into changing their behavior.
And that's the key difference between the short run and the long run. The surprise effect is temporary. As soon as people start to expect inflation, they build it into their thinking. They demand higher wages to keep up. The illusion completely vanishes. And unemployment? It snaps right back to that natural rate. You just can't fool people forever. So, here it is, the knockout punch. Friedman's conclusion was that in the long run, the Phillips curve isn't a curve at all. It's a vertical line, straight up and down, right at that natural rate of unemployment. What that means is that if you keep trying to push unemployment below that natural rate, it's not going to work. All you'll get for your trouble is one thing: higher and higher and higher, ever accelerating inflation.
Now, when Friedman first proposed this, it was just a theory, a pretty radical one for sure. But then, the 1970s came along, and the entire global economy turned into a massive, real-world experiment that would put his ideas to the ultimate test. And that test had a name that still sends a shiver down the spine of economists: stagflation. It was this absolutely toxic mix of a stagnant economy, meaning high unemployment, happening at the exact same time as runaway inflation.
I mean, just look at how badly the old model broke. According to the Phillips curve, if you had high inflation, you were supposed to have low unemployment. But in the 1970s, we got the worst of both worlds: high inflation and high unemployment. The old playbook was useless. It just had no explanation for this. But Friedman's theory, the one that included expectations, it explained it perfectly.
That crisis in the 70s is what really cemented Friedman's revolution. His ideas, which had once been seen as kind of fringe and out there, moved right to the center of the debate. They became the new foundation for economic policy and theory, and they've been shaping the world we live in ever since.
And in 1976, that intellectual revolution got its official recognition. For completely reshaping how we understand the economy, Milton Friedman was awarded the Nobel Prize in Economic Sciences.
And the official reason for the prize really captures just how huge his contribution was. It wasn't just one thing. It was his work on how we spend our money, that permanent income hypothesis. It was his rewriting of monetary history. And maybe most importantly, it was for showing everyone that trying to stabilize or fine-tune the economy was way, way more complicated than anyone had ever imagined.
So if we boil it all down, the revolution that Friedman led left us with a whole new set of rules for economics. First, that you can't ignore what people think is going to happen. Human expectations are central. Second, that trade-off between inflation and jobs, it's a short-term illusion, not a permanent choice. Third, there's a natural rate of unemployment. That's about the real structure of the economy. Fourth, the goal for central banks shouldn't be to constantly steer the economy, but to provide a stable backdrop. And finally, maybe his most famous line of all: money matters a lot.
So Friedman's biggest legacy was putting human psychology, our expectations, right at the very heart of economics. And that leaves us with a really big question for today. In our world of 24/7 news, social media, powerful investors, and influential central bankers, whose expectations are the ones that actually shape our economic future? And how do we even begin to manage an economy where what we believe will happen can actually become a self-fulfilling prophecy?